Thank you, everyone. My name is Felicia Kalkman once again, and I'll begin for the affirmative in today's debate. In the aftermath of genocide, people must work together to create a unified, cohesive nation. A nation where the hate that was built up to the point of genocide begins to dismantle. A nation where both sides can understand the weight of the atrocities that have ruined people's lives. A nation where genocide will not happen again. It is because we agree with the topic, in the aftermath of genocide, forgiveness is more important. To start this debate, we want to define exactly what forgiveness is going to mean in the context. Forgiveness is a conscious, deliberate decision to release feelings of resentment and vengeance towards a person or group who has harmed you, regardless of whether they actually deserve your forgiveness. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting, nor does it mean condoning or excusing. Forgiveness means engaging within a community through community service, education, and victim offender conferencing. It does not mean long punitive jail sentences focused on retribution and incapacitation of individuals who've done crimes. So if we think that if we can prove that forgiveness is necessary to restore order and to prevent future genocides, then we as the affirmative should win this round. The first point of 3 that we will be making in this round is that forgiveness works better than pure punishment. Elizabeth Kress, the president of Agnes Scott College, says that the best approach in such circumstances is restorative, not retributive justice, which involves acknowledgement of past crimes, but not trials for those responsible. We believe that Germany, among others, and we will talk about Rwanda a lot throughout the debate, is also an important example of this. In Germany, the Nuremberg trials focus almost purely on punishment and punitive justice rather than any kind of restorative justice. We can see that in these circumstances, the amount of anti-Semitism and hate has not dissipated from the country, but in fact, generations later is still a problem. According to one study done recently, there were 522 anti-Semitic crimes that were registered in Germany in 2017 alone, and this number has been increasing steadily throughout the past years. We can see that when there is not true forgiveness and understanding of the past crimes and the weight that they have on not only the victims but the offenders with this knowledge, that we can't dissipate the hate that caused these genocides in the first place. By prioritizing forgiveness, we can start to truly have justice within a nation. Pure punishment does not solve the core issues that caused the genocide to occur in the first place and does not give true understanding to the weight of the people that committed this genocide. If there is no justice, people don't have to feel accountable for their crimes in the same way. They can still feel no remorse at what's happening. With forgiveness, it is not only about the victims forgiving the perpetrators of a crime, it is also about the perpetrators forgiving themselves and understanding the true weight of society that they've caused. We see this in Rwanda through the Rwanda Demobilization and Reintegration Program after the genocide. People at all levels, whether they were a high-ranking official or merely a foot soldier in relation to the genocide, were able to work within the community. They were able to be educated about the effects of what they had done. They were to be educated about how the community needed to come together once again to have a successful Rwanda. My partner will continue to talk more about this in her next speech and the necessity of forgiveness in this situation. Our second contention is that forgiveness works better for both parties, whereas justice is a third party removed from the system. In justice, we are showing a perpetrator what they've done and telling them what they've done is wrong and what should be done about it. With forgiveness, both parties are coming together and acknowledging what happened and why it was so heinous and why it cannot happen again. At the end of the day, justice is created by people and used to their benefit, but forgiveness is people coming together and finding peace within themselves. The goal of punishment should be to right the wrongs and stop future atrocities. We can't do that in a system where victims and perpetrators cannot come together. Restorative justice gives victims the chance to meet or communicate with their offender and explain to them the real effect of their crimes. This is empowering to victims of such crimes by giving them a voice that they would not have in a purely retributive criminal justice system. Our third and final point is that forgiveness creates one unified community that stops future atrocities. Because forgiveness means understanding the motivations of both sides, you can understand the harms that it caused. You can understand how to stop this in the future and simply allowing anger and resentment to build. Anger and resentment never stops anything. In conclusion, we cannot continue to fight hate with more hate. Instead, we must work together as a nation to stop this from ever happening again. Thank you.
Genocide, the systematic murder of a population based on ethnicity, religion, or any number of other reasons, is the most heinous act, most heinous crime a person or group can commit, and therefore must face justice. Without justice, we cannot incapacitate the perpetrators and prevent future genocides from occurring, we cannot effectively support victims, and we cannot rebuild a stronger society. We agree generally with the framework offered by the affirmative in this round. It's about who can show which, whether justice or forgiveness, better serve society and individuals in the future. We agree with that framework, and that's how this round should be evaluated. Now let's talk quickly about what forgiveness looks like, because they haven't really discussed exactly what this looks like. They say, oh, do some community service, some engagement. I think a perfect example of what forgiveness looks like in the affirmatives world is the RTCs that happened in South Africa, where it was simply, can you come, you tell the truth, and if you tell the truth, you receive amnesty. If you tell the truth, you're free to go, you can reintegrate into society. There's really not much more past that. So that's what we think forgiveness looks like. What we think punishment looks like is what happened in the top 2 tiers of the Gacaca courts in Rwanda, where people who were masterminds or local leaders, worked on the mechanisms and the systemization of genocide ought to be punished. Those people were sent to prison, are still in prison. That's what we're advocating for today on the negative side. So now let's jump into some arguments. Our first argument in favor of justice and punishment is incapacitation. If the masterminds of genocide are not imprisoned, they can rebuild political coalitions and commit genocide again. The perpetrators of genocide were able to commit genocide in the first place because they were effective political, military operatives. They were able to build coalitions, create systems of propaganda, systematize killing, and force people to work with them and work for them to commit genocide. If these people continue to exist in society, they're going to continue to be able to work on this, regardless of whether or not, if they have to do, as they say, education or a little community service, that at the end of the day does not prevent them from rebuilding coalitions, building their power once more and moving towards genocide. I think it's also particularly important to note that education, as they say, which will make people reconcile and forgive themselves and truly understand why what they did is wrong, is specifically not going to be effective in the case of masterminds. A lot of masterminds of genocide, for example, in the case of Rwanda, were people who had been educated around the world. They weren't educated in Rwanda, they'd been educated in Europe, in the United States. It's not as though when they were systematizing the killing of hundreds of thousands of people, they didn't recognize this as something that could be wrong. They understood this, and yet they did it anyway. So this education is not going to be particularly effective and not going to be effective in preventing them from continuing to have these viewpoints. Yet more, and they'll point to examples of the Gacaca system and the foot soldiers in the system. I think it's important to note that where it may have been effective for foot soldiers, it's specifically not effective in the case of masterminds. These foot soldiers weren't nearly as ideologically driven. They were largely uneducated people and oftentimes compelled to commit this genocide, right? Because think about it, lots of moderate Hutus who said, no, I'm not going to commit this genocide. No, I don't want to kill Tutsis, also were killed in this genocide. So they really had no option. So that piece of evidence which they're going to present to you falls to the wayside and doesn't really land. The second important argument we have is about a precedent in society. So when a society is unable and incapable and doesn't punish the highest crime a person can commit, people lose faith and trust in that system. When you see your government allowing people who committed the worst crime, genocide, killed hundreds, thousands of people, not being punished, you don't trust your government to punish people and work in your interest in the most basic and simple circumstances. We see this in the case of South Africa, where we saw amnesty, where today 15% of people trust their government, compared to the 41% global average of trust in government. So significantly lower, specifically because their government has not done an adequate job of making reparations and punishing people who committed apartheid. As well, and this transitions perfectly into our next argument about the precedent and how this leads to effects on victims. Because say you're a victim of genocide. Maybe you weren't killed yourself, but your brother, your mother, your sister, your father was brutally murdered. You saw your town decimated and destroyed, and yet these people simply have to say, oh, I'm sorry, I tell the truth, I did this crime, yes, I learn, I go to education, I go to class, I'm like, yes, genocide is bad now, and yet you see these people still in your society. That has massive impact psychologically, first and foremost, for you not feeling integrated and allowed to be in your society when it doesn't punish these people. Secondarily, it can breed resentment and lead to a backlash against these people who they claim to be trying to integrate. For example, again, in South Africa, we see today the significant problem with killings of white farmers, farm killings, as it's called, in the past few years, which has been on the rise, specifically because black South Africans do not feel as though they've been adequately helped after apartheid, and do not feel as though their government adequately represents them. So in summation, I've proven to you why genocide is in a post-genocide society, justice is more important than forgiveness. First, because of the incapacitation. Second, about the precedent in society. And third, because of the effect on victims. Thank you.
Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. I'd first like to thank everybody that is here, and thank you for having us, the university, and we're very glad to be here. Now, on to the debate. Now, today's debate, as he said, as they all say, is in the aftermath of a genocide, forgiveness is more important than justice. Now, first, I'd like to talk about a couple things. According to usip.org, not that website because it will help you, TRC did not include forgiveness. That's why it flops. The reason why there's still racism, the reason why they don't trust their government, the reason why problems aren't really solved in TRC is only because there was no forgiveness, which is our point today, which is where we're saying forgiveness is more important than justice. Then I would also like to talk about the fact that they say that masterminds and the genocide in Rwanda were not, they didn't go through all this community work, they didn't go through all of this engagements and all this that they said. Well, I'd like to tell you that it is wrong. Not this site again, because it will help you. RDRP.org said that masterminds too were included in this education. I'll give an example. The General Rwanda, this person was part of the people that were training soldiers in Rwanda that led to genocide. And later on, this person went to this community work. This person went to this victim education, where they learned that what they did is wrong. And after that, this person is now a general. So not only have I shown you that it is possible, I've shown you that these people can not only go back in the community, but they can also be leaders and be good leaders, because this person is the same person that lead to Rwanda being one of the 10 most safest country in the world. And this person is the one that is leading to my security, to Victor's security, and everybody that is Rwandan in our country's security, which shows how they're wrong. And then another thing, I would like to explain what we said forgiveness is. We didn't say that forgiveness is me coming and say what I did wrong, then I say, okay, forgiveness is, I'm forgiven, then it's over. That's not what we say. We said forgiveness is engagement. Forgiveness is where the victims and the perpetrators get to talk together, get to say, the perpetrators get to admit that what they've done is wrong, and the victim get to work together again with the perpetrator, and then them going back in the community and then trying to move forward, them going back in the community and trying to evolve the community, which at the end of the day is what we want. Don't we want a better community? Don't we want a community that is evolving? That's what we want, yes. And so that's why we're saying forgiveness is more important than justice. And I would like to ask a question to the opposing side. They're saying that punishment is good. What comes after punishment? Punishment, then what? We're showing you that after the engagement, these communities are rebuilt. Like I said, the General Rwanda is helping in the security of the country. We're showing you that after engagement, these people get to evolve in the country, because they did not mention it, but the third tier of the gacaca was all about the people going, was all about the people not going in the prison and all of that, but rather going to do community work and going to admit that what they've done is wrong and so and so. And at the end of the day, this third tier is what worked more, because at the end of the day, all these people are out there and our country is evolving better every day. Our country is one of the fastest developing in the world. So we are showing you what this forgiveness have done, but then they have said punishment, then what? And then another thing I would like to talk about, which my opponent said I would explain more, the RDRP. What happens in the RDRP is that the people that commit genocide are not necessarily, do not go to jail. What they do is to go through, it's not, it's unindicated amount of time where they get to understand that what they've done is wrong, the perpetrators, where they get to do community work to show that they really understand that what they've done is wrong. And after a certain amount of time, it all depends on them and how they're willing to understand what they've done, how they are willing to work in the community. Then if they're willing to work in the community, if they agree that what they've done is wrong, if they are showing that what they've done is wrong and they understand it, then they can go back in the community and build the community. And then I would like to end by saying, at the end of the day, engagement is more important because not only are people united, are they working and solving together, but also the violence between them is resolved and at the core, and that creates a more sustainable, well-living community. And I would like to leave a certain statement. Punishment is for the generation at the time that was when the genocide happened. What happens after when there is, what happens to the generation after? What happens to the children of the perpetrator? What's happened to the children of the victims? Because if the people, the perpetrators are put in jail, then what their kids and the kids of the victim, there's this division, I would say. And if there is this division, and if they weren't forced, I would say, to work together and build together, then they're not going to move forward. And there's still going to be this division. And there's still probably going to be this genocide that they're saying the punishment is going to solve. So I would like to tell you to come to our side because we are showing more how we are going to resolve problems.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'd first like to thank you for giving us this opportunity to speak to you. I will therefore start my speech now. So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Victor Kabiru-Kasiaka. I'm the second speaker from the negative side of this motion, which states that in the aftermath of genocide, forgiveness is more important than justice, and we're stating that forgiveness is not more important than justice. The framework that the affirmative provided today is that forgiveness, they're going to prove that forgiveness should make sure that genocide does not happen again. So basically, for our side, we have to prove to you that justice is what is going to make sure that genocide does not happen again. So I'd like to tackle one point that the affirmative has basically made. They came up and said that everybody who was involved in the genocide, including all three tiers that we talked about, which included people who were involved in the government, so in the planning, systemic planning of killings, people who were involved in local governments, people who, and also the foot soldiers, if we could call them foot soldiers, the three tiers. And basically what they're basically stating is that they're giving us examples of where the forgiveness has worked, where there was only a focus on foot soldiers, and yet they're basically talking about how masterminds are also going to be included, how masterminds go into education, and yet they've just given us one example of a person who basically they talk about who was grouping up people, but that is not the only type of mastermind that we're talking about. When we're talking about masterminds, we're talking about people who were educators themselves. You have to understand one thing. What they were able to do over the period of years that they were in power, in politics, what they were able to do is not only to be able to orchestrate the media and propaganda to make sure that people viewed another person as less than human, as cockroaches. What they were able to do was turn people's beliefs around. They were able to turn people's beliefs around. They were able to say that your religion tells you to kill these people. They were able to do that in a span of a couple of years. So you have to understand that these people are very skilled, are very educated, and that they have done harm to society. I'll take your points of information later. So what we're trying to say is that education is not, the education that they're talking about is not as effective as they're trying to make it seem. Because what they've given us is just one example of a person who has come back into society. And one thing that you also have to understand is the fact that these kinds of plannings are not out in the open. You have to understand that these things go under the books, go under everything, and we do not know that these things could happen. So what is the actual risk that we're actually taking? What we're trying to tell you is that if people like masterminds are put into societies and they're able to pass by this education that they're talking about, because all they have to do is just go there and be like, okay, I can do community service, I can say, I understand what you're telling me, I understand that these things that you've done, that I've done are wrong, but at the end of the day, I have my own agenda. I'm going out, I'm going to talk to people, I'm going to make them understand that we need to kill some more Tutsis. That's basically the idea they're trying to make you understand. These people are not stupid. These people understand that they have the ability to turn people around again, and that's the biggest threat. As the President Paul Kagame stated himself, the biggest threat to the Rwandan population is the Rwandan population itself, right? Because as it had happened during before the genocide, it was mainly the Rwandan population that was turning people into killers. So we're not disagreeing with the fact that forgiveness has an impact. We're not disagreeing also with the fact that justice has an impact. But we're saying, as they frame this debate, what will make sure that genocide does not happen again? What they're talking about is getting people out into the open. Maybe they're not talking about TRCs, although that is basically the epitome of forgiveness, but they're saying they're not talking about TRCs. But if we're talking about this sort of education that they're talking about, getting people out in the open, getting those masterminds out in the open, saying that after doing community surveys and after having proved that forgiveness is, I'll finish this point and I'll get to you. After talking about how they've proved that they're just and that now they're going to serve their societies well. They're basically going to go out in the open and then going to serve their societies well. How are we sure of that? Are we ready to take this risk? In Rwanda's example, for example, 24 years down the line, we're ready to take this risk? Really? Let me take your example.
Just a question. Will you give an example where it has worked, where it has not worked?
The rest of the masterminds who are still in jail and who are still filled with this mastermind ideology. I've taken one point of information. I think that's enough. So, at the end of the day, what you need to understand at the end of the day is that there's not just one person in prison for causing these problems. You have to understand that there's so many people who have been involved in this planning, in this conceptualization of the genocide, that it would be too risky for us to get them out in the open, whatever they say that forgiveness is. Because forgiveness, by the way, they said that you can show that you're forgiven, you can show that you're righteous now, but all that you show is community service, all that you show is going to classes, all that you show is plastic. Are we allowed to? Okay. How about, okay.
Wait till the end.
Can we do that till the end? Okay, till the end. Please write it down. So, at the end of the day, we're also, first, before I finish my speech, I'll first go through the points that we talked about. What we talked about, incapacitation. We talked about justice being there as something that gives consequences to action. So basically, we're saying that if there's incapacitation of these masterminds to go out in the open and basically try to regroup people, try to re-educate people, try to get people in that mindset of re-perpetuating the genocide, then that's how we're going to make sure that genocide does not happen again. So we're not saying that forgiveness has done nothing, but we're saying that justice is much more important when it comes to preventing genocide. Because if those are the main people who have been, turning people into, how can I call it? If these are the people who have been causing the genocide by turning people into what they were, into killers, right? Isn't it the best way to keep them in jail so that people are safe from that? So let me go through another point that we talked about. We talked about the precedent in society. We talked about if the highest crime in society, genocide, goes unpunished, then the justice system and government will lose the trust of the people. Because one point that they did not mention was that the fact that there's consequences for your actions is also a preventive measure for these people who are already in society. So they failed to mention that their forgiveness plans actually included justice in the first place, included our punitive type of justice, because that was how we're going to make sure that it acts as a deterrent. Yes?
I'm just going to ask a question. If you're going to put people in jail and you're not changing their thinking, are you going to put everybody in jail?
These two different methods have different roles, but at the end of the day, we've been able to prove to you that the risk that you take by not having this type of punitive justice system for masterminds is much worse than what they're talking about. Because if you're not able to have this type of system put in for especially those masterminds, then you're sure that these people are able or have the chance to turn people around into what they were before the genocide or during the genocide. My time is up. Thank you very much. If you have other questions.